Here is the front of my house, and right up here is this massive pine tree that's in the neighboring yard. And now as we come down and pan over to the left, you'll see this little 1.5 maybe 2 foot tall pine tree that I just put into the ground yesterday. That is actually a baby from that massive tree that started growing in my yard. I dug up the little seedling, put it in a nursery pot, and there it is. It's 2 or 3 years old. I don't remember. But what I've decided is I want to put a tree ring around that to prevent the California creeping grass from invading its turf. So that's what this video is about. We're going to be putting together a tree ring. I had to put my bookcase project aside to work on my tree ring. I put the tree in the ground, and like I said before, I decided to put some edging around it. I spared you the monotonous cutting up of all the wood, and what you see here is the form. It consists of 7/16 plywood around the outside and 2x4s used for the inner border. I'm using screws to hold the outer border together, 3/8 dowels along with pocket screws to hold the inner border together. The pocket screws are an experiment. I have never tried doing it this way before. Also showing some of the stakes that will be used, and I'm going to have to add to that once it gets into the ground. Here are some spacers I made that's going to control the distance in between the two inner and outer forms to keep the width of the edging about the same all the way around. I also made some coving with my 3D printer to put a nice radius along the outside. I'll be using double-sided tape to attach them to the form once put in place. Next, I'm going to get it fully assembled to review it and see how it's going to work. Now I have it assembled with the exception of the coving that goes in the outer corners. The coves can't be installed until it's placed in the ground. Anybody looking at this that has done concrete forms has got to be asking the question, how am I going to break that form out if it is screwed together along with dowels to keep it from sliding? Coming in closer, you can see I made some 45-degree cuts in the inner form. I am also going to cut up from the bottom through that 45-degree form to leave just a bit of wood left holding that piece together. In theory, I should be able to finish that cut after the concrete has set and be able to pull those apart. In theory, this should work, but we'll find out in a couple of days. The inner and outer forms are ready, and now I've added some stakes to where they're going to be to support the outer form. To do this, I had to notch out the grass along the corners and along the middle of the form. And here is the inner form ready to be put in place, but that won't happen until the outer form is in and leveled. Sitting next to it is a very old pillow, and that is an old man's knee pad. Now the work is going to get a little tougher. Pound the outer stakes down a bit and then screw it to the form. Once the 4 corners are screwed to the stakes, I pound one down until it is about level with the grass, and then put my level in place and level out the form. Once everything is level, it is time to get the inner form in place. This process took about 6 minutes. The outer form is placed and leveled, but now it is above ground level. Add dirt and tamp it down until it is level with the bottom of the form. I do this in layers to make sure each layer is tamped down nice and tight. Where I'm at is not a cold climate, so there is no worry about having the ground freeze over, and gravel is not needed. The base is now ready, and it's time to set the inner form. This took me 8 minutes to complete. The inner form is put down, and I put in the spacers on 2 opposing sides to hold the spacing. Then pound in the stakes to hold it in place along with the center stake on the outer form. Now I move the 2 spacers to the other side and do the same thing, pounding in the stakes to hold it in place. Last thing to do is to put in the screws to hold the outer stakes to the outer form. This is because the outer form is thin plywood and these stakes are needed to keep it straight. Once the 8 stakes for the inner form are in place, it can't move, and the outer stakes are holding the outer form in place. This process only took about 5 minutes. Now I have my 6-inch level and running around the form, making sure that the inner form is level with the outer form. Any differences in the level, and I just add some dirt underneath the inner form since there's actually nothing holding it down other than gravity. Both the inner and outer forms are set, they're level, but I have some screws sticking out where I screwed them to the form, so now I've got to go around and get those cut off. And this form is now ready for concrete. Before we start mixing, I'm going to show you my concrete bench I use for dumping bags of concrete into the mixer. There are 4 steel rods that hold it together for storage, and once I pull them out, I can separate the 2 pieces, and then the rods are used for legs to hold up the top of the bench. First, I insert each of the rods into the holes in the base plate. This can sometimes be difficult because the wood tends to expand and contract with moisture. Once the legs are in place, I put the top of the pouring bench on top of the legs. I think I need to chamfer those holes so it's easier to align. There are 3 screws that come out of the top of the pouring slide to hold the bag in place, and all I have to do is lift up the one end to pour the concrete into the mixture. This was made to hold 90-pound sacks of concrete, but for this project I decided to use 60-pound because my arm is bothering me a bit. And here's what's going into today's mix. We got a 60-pound sack of Quikrete there, and I think I'm going to be using 3.5, maybe 4 bags. Top of the bag is a bag of fiberglass, some super plasticizer, and to the right is some air entrainment. Both the air entrainment and the super plasticizer reduces the amount of water needed for the mix. The fiberglass helps it to reduce cracking. Back to the forms. For the final step in preparation of pouring is to trim the tops off of all the stakes. This allows room for the concrete tools to go across the form and level everything out. Everything's ready with the form set in place, and it's time to start mixing some concrete. And I have all of the other components measured and ready to go for the first batch. I have a little bit of colorant left from a previous project, but not enough for all of the bags, so the lower layer is going to be plain concrete, and I'll use the color for the top. I am once again going to attempt to use the amount of water it says to use on the Quikrete bag. It has never been enough in the past, and I don't know why I feel I have to try again. If anyone watching this can explain why so little water is stated on the bag, I would be curious to know. Here's a picture of the bag showing to say to use only 4 pints for a 60-pound bag. When reviewing the video, I noticed I only had 2 pints measured in the bucket, but I did keep track of how many cups I had to add, so we'll see if it adds up to 4 pints. I add the water to the barrel, which was only 2 pints instead of 4, which it should have been, then the super plasticizer, then the concrete. I dump in the fiberglass and 3 tablespoons of the air entrainment. Now to start adding water until it actually acts like concrete. With this cement mixer, I found that it mixes better when the back end is elevated about 3 inches. When sitting on the ground, the concrete mix just swirls around the bottom of the barrel instead of being flopped with the blades. I will be keeping track and adding 1 cup at a time. The missing 2 pints equals only 4 additional cups. At 8 additional cups, it was looking a little better, but was still way too dry. At the 2 original pints plus 10 cups, it started to look like concrete. That is 7 pints of water, just short of twice of what it says on the back of the bag. I wonder if there is any chance Quikrete will see this video and explain the discrepancy. I dumped in the second bag and the other pre-mixed ingredients plus the additional water until I had something resembling concrete, which actually turned out still being a bit too stiff. I think it needed 2 or 3 more cups for a total of 8 pints, or twice what is labeled on the bag. I dumped this batch out and started mixing the second batch. I did not bother with the water experiment on the second mix and just added water until it looked good. I will let it mix while I place the first layer. Finally placing the first layer of concrete, which turned out being too stiff. Here you can see me using my oscillating tool as a vibrator with a custom hammer fixture I made. I discovered using this tool as a vibrator a couple of years ago. I had forgot to cut off one of the form stakes and used the oscillating tool to cut the stake after the concrete had been placed. My jaw hit the floor when I saw how it leveled out the concrete. You'll get a better view of this when I place the second layer that is not so stiff. I went around the form, filling it up about 1/2 way to the top and settling it down with the vibrator. Some of you may comment that this tree ring is too close to the tree, and you would be right. I do not expect it to last more than 5 years before the tree roots crack it. Assuming I'm still living here, I'll do something else at that time. The concrete that was left over from the first layer was dumped back into the mixer. The second batch for the top layer is ready to go. I added a little bit of color that I had left over from a previous job, but I don't think it was enough to make much of a difference. A benefit from a wheeled barrel type mixer is that if you have a long enough cord, you can dump it at the job site. Now placing this batch, and you can see it goes in easier because it is not as stiff. I fill it to just above the top of the form, and instead of screeding level, I use the oscillating tool to settle it down. It consolidates it and it flows to where no concrete has yet been placed. Doing this eliminates most of the concrete that is wasted due to screeding off the form, plus I don't have to clean it up later. Watch as the concrete flows almost like a liquid when the vibrator is applied. Just an FYI, a stiff fluid like concrete that changes viscosity when force is applied is called a non-Newtonian fluid. Ketchup is another example of this type of fluid. When I hit it with the vibrator, I can see numerous bubbles coming to the surface, and it also breaks bubbles off the sides of the form, making a nice smooth surface. I go around the form placing the concrete and vibrating it down, and then get out the tools to finish it off. Any low spots that show up are just filled in and compacted again with the vibrator. Once everything is level with the top of the form, it is time to let it set. I waited a bit too long to finish this off, and it is very stiff. I should have been on it 30 to 45 minutes ago, but I got hung up on something else. At this time, it is about 2 hours old. Cutting in with the edging tool was difficult, and I had to be careful not to take out any large chunks. I finished the inside and outside corners using a trowel because there's no way the edger will get in there. I need to find a better way to get an edge radius around corners like this. I wonder if it would work if I got another standard edging tool and cut it down so that it is only 1 inch long or smaller. That's an experiment for another project. Due to being so stiff, finishing took longer than it should have, but I think it came out okay. Now to let it set for 24 hours before breaking the forms. 1 day later, and now it's time to break the forms and see what we have. First thing to do is to get my right angle drill and pull the screws holding the corners of the outside forms. Next, I pull the screws holding the outside form to the corner stakes. Now grabbing each stake with channel locks, giving them a little wiggle and pulling them up. If I encounter any trouble, a few taps with a hammer frees them up. Grabbing the outer forms with the channel locks frees them up along with a few taps on the corner coves. Now it is time for me to be a bonehead. Grabbing the oscillating tool, this time using it with a saw blade, I cut through the remaining tabs in the 45-degree cuts on the two forms. Now I thought they should be free and should come right out. The bonehead part is that I forgot about the pocket screws until the last one. Had I removed the pocket screws, I have no doubt they would have come apart with absolutely no trouble. I was puzzled why it wasn't coming apart, knowing I had to be careful so as not to damage the concrete. Last thing to do is to clean up all the mess, scrap all the boards, and fill it in with dirt. And here it is, project completed, and it is all filled in. All the bare dirt around the outside edges will be grass in just a few short months. Going to have to find some other stuff to plant within the border, and I think I might pick basil and maybe oregano.